say, okay, I'm sorry, please talk, or please sit at the dinner table and have food with us. They really get quiet. They start sulking quite a bit. And you come to realize, okay, there are certain issues which I am not happy about, right? What do I do about these things? How do I address these issues? Or sometimes they happen even after 10 to 15 years of married life. Sometimes there is uneven growth within the family. The husband has spent more time, or the wife has spent more time in intellectual discussions, in sessions on spirituality. The example I was giving on Thursday night was to say that, sometimes, let's say, for example, the husband is working long hours, he's working, 2 jobs, and he's working odd hours. So he doesn't really have time for, spending time with the family, for going for lectures, for reading books, so on and so forth. But the wife, she has more time, so she reads books, she, goes for lectures on ethics and spirituality. She's very much a part of the community. So after 10 years of time, you can imagine, intellectually and spiritually speaking, the two are at completely different wavelengths. And suddenly they look at each other and they see certain behaviors, certain values, certain philosophies that are clearly clashing with each other. Now this is between husband and wife, but also happens between parents and children as well. One day a father or a mother will look at the child and they'll see certain behaviors in the children that they're not very happy about. So how do you deal with those behaviors? And something I think if you're a parent, you all know that when it comes to taking care of children, the challenges, they never stop, right? They just change, right? They become more difficult as time progresses, right? They used to be simple, then they become more difficult. So I can see everybody nodding over here, which is good. So just to give you some examples, and maybe you can add some more yourselves. So when the child is a toddler, putting them to bed on time, getting them to sleep. I know that's my greatest challenge with my younger one, telling her, okay, now it's time to rest, time to sleep. Or even potty training them sometimes can be a challenge. When they become a child, then suddenly, very difficult to feed them, to make them eat. Sometimes it seems like they're doing you a favor by eating their food or eating what they need to be eating. Sibling rivalry sometimes, don't ever bring one thing if you've got 2 children, because they're bound to fight over it, and sometimes they can get quite upset with each other. That happens as well. And then you get into the pre-teens, and now suddenly they realize there's something called fashion and clothing, and they all want the most fashionable clothes, and they want to look good. Excessive gaming for boys, for example. Everybody else is playing on their iPad and their iPhones, and I want to spend time as well. I know, for example, whenever there's a holiday and I ask them, what will you be doing this holiday? There's only one answer to it. I'll wake up late and I'll be on my computer or I'll be playing some games, right? Unless, of course, parents intervene and they find something more meaningful for the children to do. Early teens, and that's the issue I really want to talk about today, and that will be the case that we take on today. One of the problems that comes up, and it really affects parents quite a bit, is during the early teens when the child becomes rude, or all of a sudden becomes rude, becomes unresponsive, becomes apathetic, sometimes becomes, I don't care sort of attitude, right? And I think you all must be aware of a teenager, or maybe, we all went through the same phase as well, that, sometimes you really have to pull words out of a teenager. That same person who enjoyed talking to you, now you go and talk to them and you tell them, for example, a very simple question. You're so excited to see them after school and you say, so how was your day at school? And you're expecting to hear a very long answer. I did this, I did that, and we went here and we went there. And what do you hear? Good. Yeah, that's it. And I'm back to my whatever I'm doing, right? And that sometimes can be really hard on a parent. So how do you deal with that? Okay, that's what we're gonna be talking a little bit about that, as to why this happens and what we can do about it. And then, of course, when we get into teens and towards the end of high school and starting university, smoking, drugs, alcohol, boy-girl relationships, bullying, stealing, and a number of these issues come up at that time, or there is a concern that these issues may come up at that time as well. And one thing I should point out to you is that do not think at any time, don't think that our community is immune from what happens in society, and do not ever think that my family is immune from what is happening in society. From what I have seen and the experiences I have gone through, I have seen parents who were, if you ask me like, what's the most a parent can do? I'll tell you, look at this parent, that's the most a parent can do, all right? And even they have struggled on some very important issues with their teenagers as well, all right? So these are important discussions for us to be having. Now, sometimes when we're parenting, and a lot of parents say this, they say, the challenges are so much, they're so complicated, You know, you need to have like a master's in psychology to be able to parent. And I, for one, have never believed that you need to be able to have a master's in psychology for parenting. I believe that parenting is simple. Parenting needs a very simple philosophy. Parenting needs for us to have simple techniques, and parenting needs for us to be able to apply those techniques as well, to be consistent in applying those techniques, which have been taught to us by the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt, inshallah. Now, coming down to the bullet point over there, it says it's important to address personality or behavior issues in the right manner. Why is it important? Well, two things are important. The first thing that's important is that we address the issues. We don't just sweep them under the rug. We don't just neglect the issues. Because when we neglect the issues, it becomes even a greater problem. Right? It leads to, I find, and I've seen, it leads to depression, it leads to despair, it leads to a lot of unhappiness within the family, and it exacerbates other problems within the family. Why? Because I couldn't deal with this issue with my child or with my spouse. Okay, I'm not able to address this, but I am going to vent my frustration in some of the other issues. So suddenly all of the other issues which weren't big issues suddenly have become a big issue because I could not deal with this one particular issue. And I have had cases where, let's say a parent comes up to me and says my child needs counseling. And after I speak with that parent, I come to realize not only the child needs counseling, but the parent also needs counseling as well. They are at the point of depression, or they are at the point of despair because they weren't able to deal with those issues. So it's important for us to be able to address the issues, and secondly, not just address the issues, but address the issues in the right way as well. Because sometimes what happens is if we don't address them in the right way, not only does it not bring the family together, it takes the family apart. Not only does it take the family apart, not only does it distance your child from you, it even distances the child from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It distances the child from the religion as well. And we have seen cases where children say that I detest not only my parent, but I detest my religion, I detest God, I detest all of these things. Why? Because certain issues were not addressed properly, right? In fact, sometimes we even see cases, and you can see it for yourself, where the child will do quite the opposite, or the spouse will do quite the opposite, just to spite the other person, because things were not addressed properly. So, one, we must address the issues, and two, we must address the issues properly as well. Okay? Now, so therefore, in the discussion today, there are two dimensions that we must address for maintaining a healthy family. The first is we must address the conflict within ourselves. You know, when you find out that there's a behavior, or you just found out about it, or it's been, burning inside you, how do you first address it within yourself so that it doesn't lead to despair, it doesn't lead to anger, it doesn't lead to impulsive and strong reactions, because those are not healthy for nurturing a family, right? You first have to be able to deal with it within yourself, and then you can deal with it, within the other person. And the second thing is addressing the behavior or the personality conflict, because if we address it without hikmah and without wisdom, it can push a family member further and encourage more of the unwanted behavior. Now, coming to the first question, how do we address the issue within ourselves? And here, I just want to share with you an important character of a believer. This character is known as forbearance. And we spoke extensively about it on Thursday night. So I have a question for you, if you weren't here on Thursday night, is what is the Arabic word for forbearance? Sorry? Sabr. Okay. So sabr is patience. What's the Arabic word for forbearance? It is right there. Okay, my bad. I should have not written it there. The Arabic word for forbearance is hilm, right? Alright. Now, okay, tell me one thing without reading the notes further. Tell me, what's the difference between patience and forbearance? Sabr and hilm. Why do we have two words for it in Arabic? And two words for it in the hadith as well? When I say I'm patient and I say I'm forbearing, what's the difference between the two?
When you're forbearing, you're living the patience, like you're, how do I say it? You're actively.
So give me an example, for example.
So, for example, if your child is a drug addict, So instead of just being patient and, forbearance would be, okay, you're helping him, you're going through the trials and the whatever the drug addiction comes with, but there's a goal at the end.
Okay. So what you're pointing out is actually the difference between sabr, patience, and istiqama, perseverance. Right? Patience means I sit there and I do nothing. Perseverance means that I'm patient, but at the same time I'm working towards a goal as well. Good. But patience and forbearance. Yes.
Patience plus wisdom is hell.
Is hell, is forbearance. Okay. All right.
I think that just to add to him, that just kind of not only patience, also finding to resolve the problem and then to have better way
to address the issue. Okay. Those who are here on Thursday night, if they want to share. All right. I'm not sure who was there or who was not, but okay. So patience and forbearance. Sometimes you come across a situation in life. It's hard on you. There's nothing you can do about it. You lose a member of the family. Or sometimes you become sick and there's no cure for it, for example. Or sometimes you lose wealth and there is nothing you can do to get it back immediately. So there you're patient. In what sense? You don't complain against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has destined for you. If this is what God has destined, I submit to it. I don't complain against it. Can I do something about it? Really, I can't do anything about it. Sometimes a situation comes up in life where something wrong happens and you can do something about it. But the thing that you can do about it is the wrong thing to do. Somebody comes and swears to you, there's something you can do about it. You can swear back at them. Somebody comes and gossips about you, there's something you can do about it. You can gossip about them, for example, right? Somebody comes and says something which is wrong about you, you can do the same to them, right? And you choose not to do that. That's called forbearance, help. Right? In relationships, we have to have a lot of help, especially in our family. Why? Because as you're nurturing a child and trying to get them to change their character or trying to get them to change a little bit of their personality, it takes time. And because it takes time, you will have to be patient, and sometimes you'll have to overlook some of the things that they say to you. You'll have to overlook some of the things that they do to you as well. This is called having hilm. The hadith is beautiful, and I've given it to you as well over here. It says, "Utlubul ilm," acquire knowledge, وَتَزَيَّنُوا بِالْحِلْمِ, and adorn yourself with forbearance. Right? Why? What's the relationship between the two? See, when you have knowledge, then you can see a person's faults. You can see their mistakes. You can see their flaws in their thinking. You can see the flaws in their decision making. You can see the flaws in their character because you have knowledge. Now that you can, you're also going to need forbearance with it as well. One of the scholars he put it very beautifully. He said that knowledge is the beauty of the mind, and forbearance is the beauty of the heart and the character. We need a lot of forbearance. I'm going to talk a little more about it as well, inshallah. Now, I was reading a book. It's in Farsi. For those of you who are Farsi speaking, it's called Tasahil Aramesh, to the shores of tranquility. It's 5 volumes, and I forget the author's name now, Fahidi or Ahadi, I can't remember now. He's a scholar in Qom, and in this book he talks about marital relationships and some of the issues that come up, especially during the early days of the marriage. But some of the advice that he gives works in a family setting as well. And he teaches us how to develop forbearance, especially within the family, right? And he gives 2 pieces of advice that come to us from the Ahlul Bayt. The first piece of advice that he gives us, he says that when you see a person's flaws, it becomes a little difficult for you. So whenever you see a person's flaws, keep them next to their strengths as well. See their flaws, but also see their strengths as well. If all you do is see a person's flaws, it's going to be very hard for you to have forbearance, right? And sometimes we do that. Sometimes we compare our family to another family. And because we don't know what's happening inside that family, we see them as perfect families. So whenever we compare our family to their family, we say, look how many flaws there are. Look at my child, he can't do this, he can't memorize that, he can't pray like this, he can't recite Quran like that, he can't do his homework on time, he can't do this, my wife or my husband like this and like that. And we become very depressed, and that forbearance is taken away from us. But if we see their flaws next to their strengths as well, okay, fine, they can't do this. Well, alhamdulillah, they like to go into nature and admire the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. they like to, let's say, read the Quran, its translation in English, and they like to understand what's been mentioned in the Quran. They like to have intellectual discussions. They like to spend some time thinking about their lives. Many other things they like to do. If we see those positive strengths as well, it gives us forbearance. The second way of developing forbearance is not to look at others, but to look at ourselves. Right? Many times we don't have forbearance, this author says, because we think of ourselves as being perfect. Right? We think that we've not made any mistakes. Right? So you look at another person, you see how many mistakes they have, it takes away that forbearance from you. Therefore, the hadith teaches us that when you want to look at the flaws of others, first look at your own flaws. Especially when we're angry with somebody, we're unhappy with somebody, right? Then everything that they do goes under the microscope. We're sensitive to everything that they do, right? When you're unhappy with somebody, right? So you're unhappy with your spouse, anything that they do, why did you do that? Why did you say that? What did you mean by saying that, right? But the moment we realize that sometimes we do the same things as well, or we have some of the same flaws as well, it gives you a lot more forbearance. Right? The two beautiful ahadith, if you can just look at it together, both of them from Imam Ali alayhi salam, he says a person's own flaws are sufficient to distract him from the flaws of others. Right? But if you don't look at your own flaws, then suddenly somebody else's flaws, even though they're small, become very significant in your eyes. Right? The second hadith, one who does not recognize his own flaws magnifies the flaws of others as well. All right. So the first thing is that, we have to address the issue, but we have to have forbearance in addressing the issue. There are no instant results when it comes to developing behavior and changing personality. Think of it as, doing pottery, like working with clay. All right? If you try to make it right away, you'll break it. If you try to change it right away, you will break it. It takes time to mold clay. It takes time to mold character. It takes time to mold personality. If you try to get instant results, you will break that person. And we don't want to do that. That's the first thing. The second thing, of course, is we also have to be able to address the issue. Now, of course, every issue is different from another issue, right? I can't give you just general principles for addressing every issue. So today, I want to pick on one of those issues. But before I pick on that issue, one thing I want to say is it's very important for us to understand first why that person is demonstrating that behavior, and then for us to try and deal with that behavior. Understanding why is the key to it. I'll give an example. Maybe it's an example that might be uncomfortable, but I'll give you that example. Sometimes, and I'm going to use an example from out of town. Okay. Sometimes I go out of town and families come to talk to me. Sometimes someone will come to me and say that my wife, she wants to cheat on me. Okay. And my wife is in love with another man. And she wants to spend time with another man. Even though not only are we married, but we also have children as well. Now what would you do at that moment? And what would I do at that moment? Immediately go, how can that person do that? This is wrong. We need to sit down and we need to lecture this person. And this is completely wrong. Unacceptable. We should not have to tolerate this at all. But at those moments, it's important to me first to understand why this has happened before I even talk to the other person and say, what, you shouldn't be doing this. And in many cases I've seen, the reason it happens is why? Because
of the husband not paying enough attention.
Because of the husband not paying enough attention. The husband being too busy to express love. The husband not wanting to express love. And usually after many years of marriage, finally the wife finds somebody. There are people out there who are looking to, take advantage. Find somebody who is willing to offer them that love. And suddenly this person has gone to that person and said, you know what? If you can give me that love that I need, it's a human desire. It's natural within human beings. I'll take that. Now the point I'm trying to make over here is first we need to understand why it's happening. Right? And then we can try and deal with it. Now, the issue that we're dealing with today is a behavior that you find within teens. And by teens, I mean, somebody who's turning 12, 13, 14. That's a very special time because that's the time that, they've just gone through puberty right now. Things are very much changing within themselves. They're not just changing physically, but they're also changing within themselves emotionally. And most importantly, they're changing psychologically as well. All right? And we'll talk about that, inshallah. But one of the things that you see at that time of their life is that they display rude behavior in their speech, in their silence, and even in their body language as well. So sometimes, a mother or a father will be talking to a child, and this child who until 2 to 3 years ago, they were very polite and everything, suddenly they come up to their parent and they say, so what? I don't care. There you go again. You're telling me to do all of these things. You go and do your thing. You go and, take care of yourself. And sometimes they can be even worse than that. Use abusive language against their parents. Sometimes it's not the rude behavior, but it's the silence. I gave you many examples of that. Sometimes you're trying to carry out a conversation with the child, especially with the teenager, and they don't want to answer you. So how did your day go? Went good. What did you do today? Not much. What do you think about this? I'm busy right now, right? And you almost seem to have to struggle to pull words out of them, and they don't even want to recognize that you're there. Sometimes it's in the body language, right? You say something and the eyes roll. What does that mean? There you go again. Kind of, oh no, once again, here we go, right? Or sometimes there's a shrug, whatever, and I don't care, kind of thing. So how do you deal with that? But like I say, before we talk about how do you deal with that, let's try to understand why that even happens. Now I'm sure there are many reasons why that happens. But the 3 reasons in my research I found that I want to point out. First thing I want to point out is it's hormones, along with the fact that their intellect or their brain is not yet fully developed. One thing you should know about human beings that's different from other animals, other mammals, is that their brain mostly significantly develops outside the womb and not in the womb. Why? Because for most of the mammals that we have, their brain is not that large compared to their body size. Human beings have the largest brain compared to the body size. Now, reading some of the, or watching some of the documentaries on biology, you find that if the human brain was developed inside the womb, then delivering the baby would be very difficult. Right? So most of it develops outside the womb. So what happens is, as for other animals, the moment they're born, within 30 minutes they start to run, and within the first year they become completely independent. Human beings are different because their brain starts developing outside the womb. So the first 5 to 6 years, they're not capable of doing anything. And this seems to be part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plan to attach the human being to the mother and father, and to attach the human being to the family as well, and to provide that emotional and psychological support that they need. Right? Now when it starts developing, the first 5 years it physically develops. And by the end of the age of 5 or 6, the brain has probably completely developed, physically speaking. But then between the age of 5 and the age of 20, a lot of development is happening inside the brain. Networks are being made, networks are being broken. Now, one of the areas that's really developing at that time is the frontal lobe, all right? Especially the limbic system. What's the limbic system? The limbic system has got a number of things inside. It's in the front, up, all right? A number of things in there. It's got the hippocampus, right? The hippocampus is responsible for our memory and also for our emotions, and the amygdala, which is responsible for our emotions as well. For example, I was recently doing a presentation on drugs and how drugs affect the brain. The most important area of the brain. Very good. Their hippocampus is healthy, it's well developed, and they pick up things very fast. But then they also found when a person does drugs, especially between the ages of, let's say, 5 and 20, right, it stunts the growth of the hippocampus. By just doing drugs once or twice, it stunts the growth equal to 1 to 2 years. And that's really bad. Now it depends which drugs they take, drugs are of different levels, there's cocaine, marijuana, it depends, it's different. But that's one of the important effects that it has on the human brain. The other area in the limbic system is the amygdala, all right? And that's responsible for controlling impulses, for controlling emotions, for being able to, whenever you've got an emotional outburst, to be able to control it. Leaders, generally people who make good leaders, they have a very strong and healthy hippocampus and amygdala. Why? Because when everybody else is afraid, they're in control of their emotions. When everybody else is excited, they're also in control of their emotions. When everybody else does not know what to do, they're very calm, collected, and they can make proper judgment as well, right? Now their amygdala is still developing. Right? So on one hand, they've got these emotional rushes happening at the time of puberty. On the other hand, that part of the brain that allows them to control their emotions is not going to fully develop and mature until the age of 20. Therefore, this sort of sometimes and a little bit of emotional outburst is going to be natural within a teenager. All right? And we have to be able to recognize that. It is going to take them time, and we have to help them nurture them on how to control their emotions. Number one, very important. Number two, stress. Right? Especially for a child for whom this sort of behavior is uncharacteristic. Sometimes suddenly a child out of nowhere will come and say some things or do some things which will be quite rude in your dictionary. Right? You have to ask yourself, what's happening in this person's life? Is there stress at school? Sometimes there's stress with friends. Sometimes there's stress in the family. They see the mother and father, not happy with each other. The family dynamics are not going well. There's a lot of stress. They can feel it as well. And because they're not able to address it, then suddenly when they get an opportunity, they vent and they let go. Right? So during those moments, it's important for us to take a step back and find a moment where you can sit down with them and ask them, what's happening in your life? Right? Thirdly, friends. Okay? And that's one of the most important changes that happens in puberty. Emotional changes happen, physical changes happen, but psychological changes happen. At that age of 12 and 13, the most important realization that a child has, and it just hits him and strikes him, is that I am an independent person. I think for myself. I'm not an extension of my parent. Right? Like the arm is an extension. I'm not an extension of my parent. I can choose to think differently from my parents. And at that time also they have an urge to spend more time with their friends and peers than with their parents. Now there's a typo in the notes over there. It says that during this period of time they have a strong urge to draw close to peers and away from friends, not away from friends, away from parents. All right? No matter how hard you try to get closer to them, to make conversation with them, they seem to be remote and they seem to be drawing away. So what do we do during those times? One of the suggestions that out there is to say that during those times, you also need to be their friend as well. No, they don't need a friend from you. They need a parent from you. That's very important. They don't need another friend. They've got many. They need a parent from you. So I've said over there, and you might want to underline it, it is important that parents provide a close relationship at home and also that they maintain parental status as well. Emotional support is very important to give to them. All right? Even though they're drawing away, we should not be drawing away. We should still be there to support them emotionally and to show love to them wherever they need it. One piece of research. Now this is general. I don't want to say this is the case for everyone. Just general. Okay? One piece of research. They were looking at teens who engaged in premarital relationships. And they found generally they engaged in these relationships because they weren't finding intimacy and close relationships at home. The teen needs it. If they're not going to find it at home, and they'll find somebody else at school who's willing to give it to them, then they're going to go and explore that. Right? So the more love we provide them at home, the lesser they're going to be wandering outside of home to find that love until they are ready, inshallah, to make that decision. Okay? And secondly, also to maintain parental status. What does that mean? That means to provide moral compass to them. Right? Yeah, we can talk to them. We can come down to their level to talk to them, but we are the ones providing moral compass to them, to tell them what is right and to tell them what is wrong, all right? Another issue that's also important is a number of TV shows, unfortunately, paint a very negative picture of parental influence in the life of a teen. I don't know if you've seen these shows, but whenever the parent walks into the room in these shows, everybody goes, oh, the parents come here, why did here? Parents are not supposed to be important in your life, they're not supposed to be a part of your life. They are a hindrance and an obstacle. And unfortunately, I don't think these TV shows are doing a lot of good to our children. Maybe we need to be careful about allowing them to watch these TV shows. Alright, so these are some of the reasons why sometimes you find that there is rude behavior or there is unresponsiveness from the children. Can you think of anything else? Anything that came to your mind when we were talking about these things? Alright. Last section. Some suggestions on how to deal with rudeness or unresponsiveness. Before you read it, or if you've read it, yes.
Sometimes it's really good to be aware of what your kids are going through, because sometimes they can go through anxiety. I know there's stress and then there's anxiety, and when there's anxiety, it can lead to more anxiety. And if you don't catch it in time, kids will distance themselves from you because they don't know how to deal with it.
Right.
You know, kids may have fears or phobias when they're little, and that can lead to, you know, anxiety a little bit later. So just if your kids are scared of something or have developed a phobia, it could be anything, anything small that you and I would not even.
Yes.
But get help, because there is help available.
Right.
And if you don't treat it, you know, it may seem like nothing to you, but if you don't treat it, it can have negative repercussions.
Exactly. Yeah. I think generally we can say that if something is important to the child, never neglect it.
Yeah.
Never make it think like it's not important.
And never force them to do anything they're not comfortable with.
Okay, right.
Because when they develop these fears and phobias, and you
Sure.
force them that, no, go and do this, you know, if you're scared of heights, for example.
Right.
We think it's nothing.
Yes.
But if you make them, like a phobia is a real, it's real.
It is.
It's not something that parents should take lightly. And you may not think it is a phobia, but
Right.
yeah.
It's there. Yeah. Thank you. So now, before we move on to how to deal with it, and before you read that section, any thoughts yourself on how to deal with it? How would you deal with it? You've got a 14-year-old, one day comes home, and you say, you know, tonight we're having a family dinner, and I want you to do this, this, and this. And suddenly you hear back some words that not necessarily, you know, the best words to hear, or they don't really care. What would you do at that time?
First of all, you have to realize that they've just come back.
Right.
You may think they're 14, and because you're that much older, you get more tired than them.
Yes.
But seriously speaking, they also get tired.
Right.
They do get tired with early mornings, long days at school. The stresses they've gone in school, maybe a test hasn't gone well, maybe they're scared to tell you about it. Also try and put yourself in those shoes, because you have been through it, and you have been through that stage where you came home and you were told that you had to do this, and imagine how you felt. I think once you remember your own time and try and put yourself in their shoes, you will back off.
Right.
Seriously back off. And eventually you might think that, you know, if this is a time for a family dinner, maybe next time I should have it on a Friday night where everyone's more able to help, or on a weekend where everyone's more free, or on a pro-D day. That way they're not stressed about the next day.
Correct.
So you have to, it can't, I think having family gatherings or outings, or yes, it's important to keep the social life up, but you also have to see the demographics of your own family first, and give them that much respect.
Correct.
That you will, or before you decided this, do you have a consultation with your whole family?
Correct.
Including them in your discussion.
Correct.
Asking them, this is what we want to do, this is what we plan to do next weekend. We have to invite grandparents or this person, that person. What would your suggestion be would be the best way you can help out as well?
Correct.
And I think that works for us really well.
Right.
And that way everyone's willing, then not one, the mother doesn't think or the father doesn't think all the work's burdened on me.
Yes.
And it's a much happier gathering, and it's much more fun working that way, because everyone is in it together.
No, definitely. Making the decision, or making the children part of the decision-making process in the family, and getting them to buy into not just the decisions of the family, but the philosophy that the family has, definitely goes a long way to prevent these things from coming up.
Any
right?
outbursts.
But now an outburst has happened.
As has happened.
What are you going to do about it? Lay down the law. You're grounded.
That's the natural instinct.
That's the natural instinct, especially if that, you know, really said some wrong things, and it brings up a lot of emotions within you. Then yeah, that's the natural instinct.
I think I've not been there yet, but the proper response would be, I know how it feels when you hear something that you were not expecting from your child.
Yes.
You just back off yourself.
Yes.
And I would give myself a timeout for 2 minutes. And after 2 minutes, I'll tell them that I understand that you're not willing to talk right now, but maybe later, or whenever you feel like, I'll be available. And forget about the family dinner and everything else.
Correct. Yeah. And that's a very important piece of advice, that,
I
you
have
know,
not been there yet.
when we get emotional, not to react immediately, to give ourselves time, thank you so much, and to also give them time to be able to deal with that. One of the points I do have written down there is, when we're emotional and angry, we end up saying things that we definitely come to regret later on. We didn't mean it, we don't mean it, but sometimes people don't forget about it either, right? So I not only say sometimes 2 minutes, I say, take an hour or two off, especially when a child comes up to you first. One thing that's important, I feel, is that the relationship between parents and children should be so good. No matter what the child is going through in life, they should feel comfortable coming up to you and saying, I've drunk alcohol, or I've done drugs. They should be comfortable. And we get these examples from the Quran, right? Prophet Yusuf, for example, when he sees the dream, and he's quite, surprised about the dream, doesn't know what to do about it. Instead of going to his peers first, who may not be able to guide him properly, instead of going to, let's say, uncles or whoever it is, he comes first to the father because he feels safe in the hands of the father. Child should be able to come up to you and say the most, wrongest thing, that I've done this, and feel safe in your hands, all right? And at that time, once you hear it, I don't think immediately is the right time to respond to it. To say, okay, I understood what you've said, I'm a little bit upset, okay, but I think we both need to digest this, we need to think about it, and then we'll talk about it. Maybe you want to talk about it 1 day later, or 2 days later. Okay, if it's something which is urgent and it's an emergency, you talk about it immediately. But to give yourself time to digest what has been said, and then to think about what are some strategies you want to put in place, and not to give an emotional response right immediately at that time is very, very important. Okay. Now, the way I've broken it down is, I've said actions not to take, and actions that should be taken. Because the Ahlul Bayt teaches there are 2 ways of trying to nurture somebody. You can either nurture them with destructive criticism, which is very wrong, or you can nurture them with constructive guidance. Let's call it guidance, all right? Which is what we should be doing. We want to nurture. We don't want to destroy a person's personality. We don't want to destroy a person's, self-esteem either. Okay? That's very, very important. So 2 things I've said over there is, 1, don't lecture excessively. It doesn't help. After a while, it turns into nagging. And after a while, their ears may be open, but their hearing is closed. They don't listen to anything that you say anymore. All right? So there are times where we need to sit down and clarify our expectations. If that means giving a 5, 10 minute, 15-minute lecture, we need to do that. But then to do it over and over and over again, every time there's at the dinner table, to just repeat that, I don't think that's a good idea. And the second thing I've said is, don't break the teenager's self-esteem. All right? It is his self-esteem that gives him respect. Values come from having self-esteem. Once he has no self-esteem, don't expect any values to come from them. And therefore, the most beautiful hadith that we can use over here is, the 6th Imam says that the most beloved person to me is the one who gifts me my flaws. Gifting. All right? Now, when you gift somebody, you gift out of love. When you gift somebody, you gift it in a way that the other person is going to be happy about it, is going to be pleased about it as well. We need to gift it to our